Princess Celestia the Changeling Queen, Chapter 21, Mother and Daughter. It is always so simple and so complicating to accept an apology. Michael Chabon. For some inexplicable reason, Lamia found the tall wooden door to her mother's stateroom more forbidding than the door to her sister's room. Perhaps it was simply how emotionally exhausting she had been after finally forgiving her sister, but it was more likely she was just worried about her mother's reaction. At this point though, Lamia had made up her mind. She was going to explain to Chrysalis the circumstances of Syndra's betrayal and what she had tried to do for their hive. The standoff initiated by the Changeling hive had to stop, and it could only come through from some form of reconciliation. Taking a deep breath to steel herself, the young queen unlocked the door with her magic, and stepped in.
"Mother, do you have a minute?"
asked Lamia as she entered the stateroom and faced its only occupants. Chrysalis didn't answer immediately. Her focus was completely devoted to a little colored pebble on top of a detailed map of Equestria. Curious, Lamia checked the placement of the pebble, and to her puzzlement, it seemed to be placed over Canterlot.
"Sorry, Lamia, but can you give me your honest opinion for a moment?"
asked Chrysalis, her eyes still focused on the pebble.
"Of course, Mother,"
said Lamia.
"Was it a good idea to attack Canterlot?"
asked Chrysalis, turning to her daughter. Lamia blinked, surprised by her mother's query.
"What made you ask that question?"
asked Lamia. Chrysalis sighed.
"I've been wondering about why your sister betrayed our hive. I can't understand how she could have thought it prudent to help Celestia force our hive to surrender."
Lamia pondered the question in her head, a frown on her face, before shaking her head in resignation. Yes, she had not particularly wanted to launch an attack on Canterlot, but...
"Mother, a good idea then and a good idea now are very different things. Back then, we had a good reason to believe the best course of action was to invade Canterlot because we really needed the love to survive, even if it would take great effort and massive risk to get it,"
said Lamia comfortingly.
"But it was not the best decision that I could have made, and I did not take your suggestion of caution in full consideration,"
said Chrysalis haltingly. The Elder Queen glanced forlornly at the map.
I endangered our hive and caused it so much trouble just to take revenge on those that had no idea of what they did to you."
Lamia blinked. It seemed her mother was making an effort to understand her role in this whole conundrum. Deciding to go ahead with her plan, Lamia composed her thoughts and spoke up.
"But they didn't. And I know the exact reasons of why Syndra betrayed us."
Chrysalis spun around, her eyes wide.
"You talked to her? What did she say?"
she asked, trying to give an impression of solemnity. However, her attempts to keep the concern from her voice all but failed miserably. Slowly, Lamia explained the details of her sister's betrayal. When she told her that Syndra was given the chance to flee and return to Celestia, her mother's eyes widened and then narrowed. Her expression switched from contemplative frown to snarling anger, and back again. Strangely enough, all throughout Lamia's explanation, Chrysalis said nothing. Her features were easily readable, but she remained silent, her ears attentively listening to Lamia's report. There was a moment where Lamia was afraid her mother would explode in rage and indignation, but while the queen shook and snarled, she made not a sound. When Lamia had finished recounting what Syndra had told her, she sat and waited for her mother's response. It would have been highly amusing to watch her mother's features contort and stretch if the tension in the air wasn't as heavy as a full-grown dragon, and her sister's happiness wasn't on the line.
"So, let me get this clear. Syndra turned herself in so that she could get close to Celestia and give her a reason to spare our hive. However, she gave up our infiltration strategies because she didn't trust us and became convinced that we had gone mad?"
asked Chrysalis in a slow, deliberate manner. From the tightness of her jaw and the rapid flicks of her tail, Lamia could tell her mother was suppressing her emotions, but otherwise she seemed merely thoughtful.
"Yes, Mother. She apologized to me and asked me to tell you that she's sorry and regrets her betrayal. She also told me that she'll humbly accept any punishment that you add to her existing sentence,"
said Lamia. Calmly, she waited for her mother's reply. But for a long time, Chrysalis said nothing. Her teeth were gritted and her eyes were shut, as if she was at war within herself. Unable to decide and yet showing none of her feelings, Lamia really wanted to know what was going on in her mother's head. But she was worried that any intercession now would tip the scales somewhere that she couldn't predict, so she remained silent.
"Did you forgive her, Lamia?"
asked Chrysalis quietly. Suppressing her curiosity at her mother's decision, Lamia nodded.
"Yes, she's my sister and she deeply regrets what she has done. I love her. And while I am angry, I will not let this incident cause a rift in our relationship."
Chrysalis sighed deeply.
"Then you are a greater changeling than I could ever be, Lamia. I simply cannot forgive her."
Lamia's heart dropped like a stone. She had been hoping that her mother would be merciful and that their family would finally be reunited again after all these years, but it was not meant to be.
Mother, please! Syndra loves the Hive, and while she committed treason, she did so wanting to save us from our own folly!
Begged Lamia, who then bit her own lip to keep herself calm.
I know, Lamia, but I can understand why Captain Armor's Royal Guard made their mistake. I see the reasons for why Celestia manipulated Syndra into a position where she made a bad decision. But your sister, she betrayed me, Lamia, and she confessed to it. Yes, Celestia played a part in getting her and in doing so, but that doesn't change the fact that she broke the last bit of trust that I had in her.
As Chrysalis turned to face her, Lamia could see that her mother's eyes were moist, and her features were warped with greater anguish than Lamia had ever imagined. It was as if Chrysalis was in pain simply from talking to her.
I'm sorry, Lamia, I just don't trust her anymore. Your sister will resume her exile, except this time she will be confined to the Badlands. She will be monitored every day and given food with love infused into it so that she doesn't starve, but will receive no contact from any changeling whatsoever.
Lamia shook her head in denial. This couldn't be happening. Her family had never been perfect, but with her mother's mind unchanged, Lamia found her last vestiges of hope vanquished. Her heart froze, an aching cold seizing within its vice. Her mother would never be able to forgive her sister, and she would never be able to return to the Hive. They could never be a family ever again. For a moment, Lamia was furious at her mother. Why wouldn't she forgive her own daughter? But at the same time, Lamia understood. Syndra had committed the changeling equivalent of a capital offense not once, but twice. She had revealed a military secret, while not one of the Cardinal 6 changeling commandments, was still a crime punishable by death. Moreover, while her intentions were good, she still knowingly broke laws designed to protect the Hive at all costs. If the laws were to be interpreted by the letter, Chrysalis had actually been lenient. So Lamia simply stood there in despair until Chrysalis's sympathetic tone momentarily broke her from her frozen state.
You may continue to visit Syndra as you wish for the duration of this conference, but once this is over, your sister is to resume her exile.
Despite her trembling legs, Lamia managed to hold back her tears and look her mother in the eye.
I understand.
Lamia bowed and trotted out of the chamber with a heavy heart. She knew that she would have to tell her sister. Syndra was lying on her bed the next morning, reading one of the books that were in the room the equestrians had provided her. It was an interesting work on equestrian history. The book seemed surprisingly honest about past mistakes the princesses and equestrians had made, but perhaps it was written to appear that way? Syndra wasn't sure, but she was currently absorbed in the history of the Second Griffo-Equestrian War when she heard a knock on the door in an unmistakable voice.
May I come in, Syndra?
Asked Celestia. The young changeling instinctively gulped, but quickly found herself relaxing. The alicorn had visited on several occasions to check up on her, and she did appreciate her concern. Not to mention she made an entertaining conversationalist.
You may,
said Syndra. The door swung open to admit Celestia, beautiful and elegant as ever and wearing a friendly smile.
You seem a little more cheerful today,
said Celestia, sitting down on a chair beside Syndra's bed.
Yes, Lamia visited me,
said Syndra, trying to guard her feelings. She had given up on trying to figure out how Celestia read her emotions. Every time the alicorn visited and talked with her about feelings, though, Syndra always felt a little better. Thus, she couldn't help but enjoy Celestia's company, even if the princess was partially responsible for her predicament.
Oh, I'm glad that you seem to have come to an understanding. Is there something on your mind, though?
Asked Celestia. Syndra merely nodded, averting her gaze. Her sister had told her that she would return to her room today to tell her about their mother's decision. While Syndra had been overjoyed that her sister now understood why she had done what she had done, all night she had wondered what her mother's decision would be. She dreaded it, and yet she dared to hope that everything would be just fine.
Lamia plans to...
An odd canter of hooves on stone distracted Syndra, and she looked up quickly enough to see her sister open the door to her room. When Lamia entered the room, a depth of sadness washed over me. I suddenly felt as if I'd never feel happy again. It was grief so keen that I actually had to suppress my changeling senses.
Lamia, what happened?
Asked Syndra, voicing the very question that I had on my mind. What could have possibly caused such sadness to overcome the usually cheerful young queen? Lamia seemed to deflate, and her head drooped to the ground. I could see the tear stains from her single eye and the hesitation that locked her jaw.
Mother, what did she say?
Asked Syndra in a tone so soft I could barely hear her. I didn't want to draw any conclusions, but my heart sank at Lamia's dejected voice. Lamia cringed.
Mother, she won't forgive you. She said that she can't forgive a changeling that she no longer trusts. She's allowed me to visit you during the conference, but has told me that you'll resume your exile in the Badlands and that you'll be monitored every day. You'll be fed, but no changeling is to have contact with you,
croaked Lamia in a mournful half-sob. I turned to Syndra. She stood there, still as a polished black statue. It was her eyes, though, that caught my attention. They were filled with resigned sorrow, as if her worst dreams had come to life.
Okay, I understand. I mean, it's not that bad. I'll be fed, and...
Syndra hiccuped, and somehow, in spite of the torrents of sadness that she was emanating, she managed a small smile. She wasn't fooling anybody, and I quickly slid off of the bed. Immediately, the elder changeling ran to her sister and embraced her, just in time for the dam holding back Syndra's feelings to break. Her crying wasn't earth-shatteringly loud or terrifying. Actually, Syndra sobbed and whimpered quite softly. But it was the sorrow of some pony who had lost everything and had nothing left to live for. She clung to Lamia like she was her life raft, and yet I now knew that even she would be torn away from her. Lamia was crying herself, trying to stay strong for her sister. But I could see her leaning on Syndra as much as Syndra was trying to burrow herself into her. I wanted to silently leave this place. It was too sad. Even if I wasn't able to sense the depressing emotions in this room, I would have been unable to watch this for any longer. Even with all the anguish, I'm pretty sure they're gonna find a way to somehow speak with each other or communicate. Because it can't be the end for them, there's no way. Anywho, let's get on to our strong donators. Top donators are 630, Peter Coulthard, J Tinman, Darkside, and Only One Thing. Rayden, Narwhals, Black Moonheart, Pastel Skies, Austin Rollins, Crazy Killer 557, Stu Hex, Sword Brother and Mordred, Amikarn Lyre, Will, Chris, Twinkie, Hutzaza, Dospo, and many more fantastic people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.